Hi everybody, it's Kay from Everyday Kay and I'm back with a different type of video. We're talking about bipolar 1 disorder. I was recently diagnosed with bipolar 1 September of this year. I had a bipolar relapse. Didn't even know what a bipolar relapse was, but it's due to when you have a lot of stress. I'm a person that I'm strong-willed, I'm tenacious. So when stress comes on, I typically can't feel stress. Being tenacious, being strong-willed, I kind of always ignored the signs of stress. I've always ignored the signs of bipolar. I mean, not bipolar, depression. I've always ignored the signs of anxiety. So I was working a job where I was like working myself to death. Also, what I learned about myself is that I'm a perfectionist. Once I learn something, I want to continuously perfect it, especially if I enjoy it. If I enjoy it like I enjoy being a recruiter, I want to continuously perfect my profession, perfect my craft, and recruiting down to learning everything about job applicants and sourcing. And we're not going to make it about recruiting right now because we're talking about bipolar. So learning this about myself, right before I was hospitalized this September of 2018, when I first learned that I was suffering from bipolar 1 disorder. I was hospitalized. They diagnosed me, a psychiatrist, board certified psychiatrist, diagnosed me as bipolar 1. I was having a bipolar relapse. Never heard what a bipolar relapse was, but in my life, it was a component of me dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety in that moment. I was dealing with stress, I was dealing with anxiety. I wasn't dealing with it, I was ignoring stress, I was ignoring anxiety, to the point where my brain kept going. I kept writing things down because that's how I deal with my racing thoughts. I'm constantly writing lists. I stopped writing lists. The moment I stopped writing these lists and stopped using my coping mechanisms, I stopped sleeping. I became an insomniac. I became an insomniac. The moment, the days up until I took myself to the hospital, I was experiencing insomnia. I could not sleep for 4 days. I probably had slept, you know what, it was 5 days. I had probably only slept 4 hours. It was all right. I kept going, kept pushing myself, kept taking care of my daughters, was neglecting myself, not sleeping, ignoring all the signs. I had an issue where I just couldn't sleep. I became completely irrational. I became very intolerable for the people that I was working with. And I just said, my heart was racing. I couldn't sleep. I thought I was having a heart attack. So I checked myself into the hospital. From the hospital, they put me in a behavioral health unit because they couldn't find any physical things that were going on with me. It was all mental. It was anxiety. Anxiety, stress can kill you. When they say stress is a component of anxiety, anxiety and stress can kill you. That's my personal story. I was recently hospitalized this month, or last month in November. I had another anxiety attack. I was working myself to death. I was only required to hire 10 people. I hired 22 people that week, ignoring the signs of stress. Not that I couldn't handle the job, it was the environment that got to me. I was working, I work in a really negative environment. My supervisor is a bully, in a sense, and my best was just never good enough. They wanted me, I was hiring these workers, they wanted me to bring in more quality workers, where these are the type of workers that you guys have been hiring since the beginning of time, before I got here. And now you want to all of a sudden switch up the quality of workers that are coming in. How am I able to do that? So I'm working around the clock trying to figure out where can I get these quality workers from that A, they're making less than minimum wage, and 2, they have less than desirable jobs. So I'm doing my best. My best wasn't good enough. 22 applicants a week, only required to bring 10 in. Me ignoring the signs, I enjoy this job, I'm gonna keep pushing myself and pushing myself and pushing myself until I can produce these results, because I'm tenacious and I know that I can turn water into wine, basically. So with me, I ignored these signs. couldn't sleep. I also was recently diagnosed with hyperthyroidism. I can do a separate video on that, but hyperthyroidism goes hand in hand with some of the symptoms of bipolar. You get insomnia, you get irritable, you have a racing heartbeat. So I have both of these things going on simultaneously on top of me dealing with a stressful environment. Thankfully, they here in Virginia, they're very proactive with medical and mental things. So they diagnosed me with hyperthyroidism, which is one of the most underrated diagnoses in women, and we deal with it so often. I'm on medication with that. I've been keeping up with my medication management, and I am doing amazing, FYI. But before I keep going about myself, I want to formally educate you guys on what bipolar diagnosis, or bipolar 1, because I have the 5th edition, and Prescription for Nutritional Healing, a practical A to Z reference to drug-free remedies using vitamins, minerals, herbs, and supplements. So they also have diagnoses in here, and I'm going to be reading out of this and giving you guys the formal diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder. Don't know what bipolar 2 is. I can look it up if you guys desire it, but I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar 2. I was diagnosed with bipolar 1. So I'm going to be reading this lengthy, this part, and then I'll give you guys some of what the diet recommendations are, because it's important to understand that although I was diagnosed with bipolar, although I have a psychiatrist and I take medication for manic depressive disorder, which is extreme anxiety, extreme depression, you also want to make sure that you're using your coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms being fresh air, aromatherapy, exercising, because it's getting those natural endorphins into your mind, into your brain. You want to make sure that you're not completely depending on the medication, because you don't want to create dependencies. Because what would happen if I took this medication to sleep? Going back to 2015, I was dealing with a stressful environment. I was diagnosed extreme depressed, extreme anxiety, not bipolar in Arizona. I was on Zoloft. I was on, what's the other big one? I was on Xanax. I took them as needed. I started to learn my body then. I started to learn when I got extreme anxiety, still really ignoring the signs, just kind of taking it to kind of wind down. But all in all, it's important to understand yourself. It's important to understand what makes you happy. These things that make you happy can calm you down or bring you up in a depressive state or an anxious state. Yoga is something that I do. I like to run. I like to exercise. I like to sing. I like to listen to music. I like to breathe fresh air. Fresh air to the brain is always good. Aromatherapies. I'm a lavender vanilla person. I love lavender and vanilla scents. They make me happy. It's a chemical reaction that's happening in my brain when I'm smelling this lavender and vanilla. I don't have a PhD, so don't take my word for verbatim. I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so I do know a little bit about bipolar, but I'm not able to formally diagnose anyone because I don't have a PhD. But back to this book, because with my bipolar disorder, my racing thoughts will have me talk in circles. And if you guys followed me, you know that I tend to talk around myself, so I have to stop myself, especially if I'm going to be on here giving information to you guys. I have to be relatable to people who aren't bipolar, to people who won't be able to follow my layered thinking and my layered speech. So let me go back to here. Bipolar disorder, formerly known as manic depressive disorder. Bipolar disorder is a variant of classic depression. It typically begins as depression and then develops into alternating periods of depression and mania. Mania is also a component of anxiety. A person with severe bipolar may go from feeling unrealistically and dangerously invincible and elated to being overwhelmed with misery and despair, even suicidal. I want to say that I've never been suicidal because of my faith and my spiritual background. I just never thought of it. I'm not knocking people that have, because what being in these behavioral units taught me is that I've spoken to people who have bipolar and they come from different backgrounds. That shit is real. Like, I talk to people that have tried to kill themselves over and over again, unsuccessful. So having a bipolar brain will cause you to have those type of thoughts, and some of the medications can even bring those type of intrusive thoughts in your mind too. So just be cognizant of that. Some of the symptoms of bipolar disorder are changes in sleep patterns, withdrawal from society, extreme pessimism, a sudden loss of interest in and failure to finish projects that were started with enthusiasm, chronic irritability, sudden attacks of rage when crossed, loss of inhibition, and changes in sexual behavior that may range from a complete loss of sex drive to sexual access. It is also estimated that less than 2% of the population, I don't really get into the percentages, but 2% of the population in the United States suffer from some forms of this disorder. The course of bipolar disorder is highly variable. Both mania and depression can vary from severity and in length of cycles from depression to mania and back again. Can occur over the course of a few days, many months, or in some cases years. I also want to stop there and say that I suffer from postpartum depression as well. After I had both of my children, I suffered from 2 years. I believe when I had Lennox, I suffered from 3 years. She's my 3-year-old. 3 years of postpartum depression. I was just really in a low state for a long time. Sort of like an Eeyore type of, didn't find joy in anything. And I'm starting to kind of get out of that. So I want to let you guys know that I'm recognizing that in myself as well. Low self-esteem. Never had low self-esteem though, FYI. And feelings of hopelessness characterize the depressive phase. A person experiencing depression may lack motivation to do anything, even get out of bed. I don't know if I said this, but I've known since I was 19, just kind of in retrospect, from going to school, learning about the components of bipolar, and going back to my childhood to where I would sleep all the time. So I was undiagnosed with bipolar or depressive disorder since the age of 19. Or even before that, I remember when I was in school and I just didn't have any desire to do anything as a high schooler. Like, I just didn't want to go to the games. I did, when big games came up, but like stuff that you do when you're in high school, I just didn't do it. I was always forward thinking, planning a way out of this, which I kind of stole the joy of my childhood because I was too busy planning into the future, which is also a component of bipolar or depressive disorder. Some people simply sleep for weeks, withdraw from social activities, avoid relationships with others, and become unable to work. Also want to let you guys know that bipolar is bipolar, but some people also have components of post-traumatic stress, and I dealt with a lot of traumas in my childhood, which may have caused this bipolar relapse. I started talking about some of the traumatic things that with the therapist that I had gone through my childhood, and it just kind of triggered something in me that caused a lot of anxiety and insomnia. So I'm learning as I'm speaking to you guys. I've been kind of doing some inward healing. So back to nutritional healing. Others may seem to be living normal lives, going to work, interacting with others, but inwardly feel a deadening sadness and are unable to experience genuine pleasure. The periods of mania often start suddenly and without warning. Some people experience what is called hypomania, excitement that does not necessarily appear to be a sign of mental illness, just great enthusiasm and energy. Others experience full-blown manic psychosis in which they have seemingly boundless energy and are ceaselessly active and easily distracted. I dealt with all of that, y'all. They may not want to rest or sleep for 24 hours or more. I wanted to sleep. I just couldn't shut my mind off to sleep. Mental activity is sharply accelerated. The delusions of grandeur, persecution, or invincibility are not uncommon. Most people in this condition seem to be utterly elated for no apparent reason, but some become unreasonably irritable and hostile. They may even have hallucination. Despite all this, a person experiencing full-blown mania generally believes that he or she is functioning at peak efficiency. The cause of this order is not well understood, but there are several theories as to its origin. It may be triggered by extreme stress. Heredity may be a factor. In some cases, some researchers believe that early experiences such as a loss of a parent or other early childhood traumas play an important role. See, I'm going to stop there and say, when you experience things as a child, we sometimes have a unique ability to kind of push those things down into our subconscious, even down to the moment that they happen. So when you start to kind of open up those portals in your brain and you start to talk about some of the things that happened in your childhood that were traumatic, you start to relive those experiences, and anxiety and depression may come on from that. That's post-traumatic stress, which is also a component of depression and anxiety. Where did I leave off? Oh, okay. Others believe that the manic phase is used unconsciously as a kind of psychological. If I read this already, I'm sorry, y'all. This light is blinding me. As a sign of. Others believe that the manic phase is used unconsciously as a kind of psychological compensation for the depression that otherwise engulfs the individual. Biological factors are also possible. It can be hereditary. There is evidence that intracellular sodium increases during the mood swings of bipolar, then returns to normal after recovery. It is also known that in depressed individuals, brain chemicals called monoamines are depleted. Monoamines. I've only known of the dopamines and the serotonin levels being low, but this is a new phrase for me. The symptoms of some childhood psychological disorders such as attention deficit ADD and attention hyperactive. I'm not going to read that one because I feel like I've given enough of the bipolar disorder, and now they're going into different disorders such as ADD, schizophrenia, and ADHD. We don't need to hear that. Also, I wanted to give you guys some tips on what type of diet they're recommending that you have, because you can't just depend on the medication. You have to do some things on your own to kind of help yourself out, because everybody's different, but you can do some natural things, this nutritional healing to help you out in combination with your coping mechanisms and your dieting. If you guys have followed me for a long time, you guys know that I'm a holistic girl. I'm into holistic healing, and I'm doing a 21-day fast currently. This is day one of my 21-day fast. I'm trying to shift my body and my mind back into being a vegetarian. So this is spiritual for me, and this is also been going through a lot. These diagnoses have kind of put me in a negative state. So I'm doing it spiritually and for holistic reasons. But you want to eat a diet consisting of vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, and legumes. I, for one, can eat lentils every single day. Amy's Organics carries these lentils, and all you have to do is put a little salt and pepper in it. And when I tell you the texture of a lentil, if you haven't tried one, trust me, bomb.com. I'm a big taste person.